What if Jesus had never been born on earth? No Bible, no Christianity, no cross, no idea of forgiveness that shaped the world. Now think with me. Would the laws be the same? Would human rights exist? Would the way we view guilt, punishment, and mercy be the same? Perhaps you've never paused to consider this, but much of the world you know exists only because of that birth. Remove Jesus from history, and the entire planet changes. So go ahead, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because now we're going to reconstruct the world as if Jesus had never existed. The hospital corridor smells of cheap disinfectant and old urine. A 72-year-old woman lies on a gurney propped against the wall for 3 days. No one screams. No one complains. Her daughter passes by occasionally, looks, sighs, and leaves. There's no point in arguing. The system works this way. She knows her mother won't receive treatment. The spreadsheet has already decided. Advanced age, chronic heart disease, high cost, zero return. The woman will die there. Everyone knows the daughter is just waiting for the body to be released so she doesn't pay a fine for abandonment. This isn't cruelty, it's logic. Limited resources, priority for those who produce, and no one here learned it should be different. No one ever heard that the last would be first, that the weak deserved care, that there was something sacred in every human life. These phrases were never spoken, because Jesus Christ was never born. In Judea, a territory occupied by the Roman Empire, a child did not come into the world. No one paid attention. There was no star, no kings, no flight to Egypt. One less pregnancy in a poor province. Zero impact. The Roman machine kept running, and with it, all the brutal logic that had always governed humanity remained intact. That carpenter who would walk through the villages saying that even the poor had value never existed. That preacher who would touch lepers, who would eat with prostitutes, who would say it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. None of this happened. Jesus never said you should love your enemy. Never said let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Never said that what you do to the least of these, you do to him. Without these words, the world followed the rule it always had. The strong dominate, the weak serve or die. In Judea of that time, slaves were tools. You bought them, used them, broke them, threw them away. Jesus would have looked at a slave and said he was a child of God, equal to any king. He would have planted an idea that would take centuries to flourish, but which would eventually destroy the entire structure of slavery. But Jesus wasn't there, so slaves remained things. When they grew too old to work, they stopped receiving food. They died alone in a corner. No one cried. There was no point in crying over a broken tool. The parables Jesus would have told were never told. The story of the Good Samaritan, of the prodigal son, of the rich man and Lazarus, none of this entered human consciousness. No one learned that you should help even those who hate you. No one learned that forgiveness is necessary. No one learned that accumulating wealth while others starve is sin, because sin, as an absolute moral concept, never existed. Wrong was only what caused you trouble. Right was only what benefited you. When Rome began to crumble, there was no institution ready to hold the pieces together. Jesus would have founded a community that would spread throughout the empire, that would copy books, organize hospitals, create universities. But Jesus never founded anything. The Catholic Church never existed. Europe plunged into chaos without a safety net. Wars turned into total extermination. Jesus would have taught that killing is always wrong, that there are limits even to violence, that enemies are still human, made in the image of God. But without him, war was just a matter of efficiency. You didn't defeat the adversary, you erased them. You killed everyone, men, women, children, the elderly, burned houses, destroyed fields, poisoned wells. Entire tribes disappeared without a trace. Languages died, cultures vanished. Revenge became a family inheritance passed down through generations. Grandsons of grandsons still killed for something that happened 2 centuries prior. Knowledge began to disappear at an alarming rate. The monks whom Jesus never inspired didn't exist to copy manuscripts. Ancient texts rotted in abandoned libraries. Greek philosophy, geometry, medicine, everything was lost. Because without the idea that knowledge is a divine gift to be preserved, it was just parchment. And parchment is good for making horse saddles. In 300 years, the equivalent of 2,000 years of intellectual progress vanished. Centuries of fragmentation passed. Small kingdoms relentlessly killing each other. Jesus would have said, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's," creating the separation between political power and moral authority. But without him, power was the only authority. Kings did as they pleased. The only rule was brute force. If you could kill to take the throne was yours. When science began to advance, it did so without any breaks. Jesus would have said that every human being is made in the image of God, possessing inviolable dignity. But without him, the human body was just matter. Prisoners became test subjects. Mentally ill individuals were dissected alive because scientists wanted to see the brain functioning. They tied the person to a table, opened the skull, poked different parts. Screams, convulsions, loss of function, all documented. Pregnant women were cut open without anesthesia to study fetal development. Children were infected with diseases to test treatments. Doctors published the results in journals, won awards, became celebrities. No one was shocked. Jesus would have wept seeing this. He would have overturned tables. But Jesus never wept for anyone, because he never existed. Science soared. In 200 years, discoveries that in another world would take 500, anesthesia, surgery, antibiotics, all accelerated because you could test directly on humans, as many as necessary. 1,000 people died in an experiment? Fine. You discovered a cure for a disease that would save 10,000. The calculation worked out. Jesus would have said you cannot harm one to save 1,000, that each one matters. But Jesus wasn't there to say that. Industrialization arrived, and it was a massacre. Factories operated 22 hours a day, stopped for 2 hours for cleaning, then resumed. Children aged 5, 6 years old worked on the machines. Small hands were perfect for reaching tight spaces. When they lost a finger, 2 fingers, an entire hand, they were sent away. No finger, no utility. Jesus would have said, "Let the little children come to me." He would have made that such a grave sin that not even the worst exploiters could ignore it. But without him, a child was just cheap labor. They cost less, complained less, died, and you hired another. Accidents killed dozens per week. Boilers exploded. Gears caught people. Toxic gases leaked. Bodies were thrown into a collective pit. Earth piled on top. Families received nothing. Sometimes they weren't even notified. The person simply didn't return. After a few days, it became obvious. Revolts happened. They always happen when you crush too many people. But they never turned into a movement for rights. Jesus would have organized the poor around an idea, universal dignity. He would have given a simple narrative. You are children of God. You deserve justice. But without him, revolt was just chaotic fury. Workers burned the factory, killed some foremen. The army arrived. Machine guns ended everything in 15 minutes. Bodies were piled in the square as a warning. Slavery never ended. It changed names about 50 times, but it never ended. Jesus would have said, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free." He would have planted the seed that would destroy slavery. But without him, the arguments against it were always practical. Slavery is inefficient. Never slavery is wrong because people are not property. That phrase didn't exist. So slavery disappeared when it was inconvenient and returned when it was useful. It always returned. In the current world, there is a lifetime servitude contract. You sign when you're desperate. You receive £5,000 in hand. The company owns you until you die. It can transfer you. It can sell your contract. It can lend you to another company for 3 months. You work where you're told, live where you're told, eat what you're given. When you collapse, when you can no longer produce, you are discarded. This is legal. This is common. 7 million people live this way in this nation alone. Jesus would have vomited seeing this, but Jesus never vomited seeing anything, because he was never born. Genocides happened all the time. They happen even today. Millions die in weeks. Chemical weapons, industrialized extermination camps, drones programmed to identify and eliminate specific groups. Everything documented, annual reports, satellite photos, leaked videos. And the international reaction is not our problem. Jesus would have said, love your neighbor as yourself. He would have expanded, everyone is your neighbor. He would have created the idea of universal humanity. But without him, each group looks out only for itself. People X can exterminate people Y, their problem. The world reached a point where rights exist, but they are conditional. You have rights as long as you produce, as long as you pay taxes, as long as you don't cause trouble. The moment any of these factors changes, your rights evaporate. Jesus would have said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That you are not defined by what you produce. But without him, you are exactly that. A productive unit. When you stop producing, you become trash with legs. Children learn this before they can read. In schools, the focus is efficiency from the age of 3. You are evaluated quarterly by your output. There is a public ranking. The children know where they stand. Those in the bottom 20% are separated. They go to special classes. There, the education is minimal. Enough reading to understand orders. Enough writing to sign documents. Enough counting not to be overly cheated. At 12 years old, these children are sent to juvenile labor camps. They learn basic trades, welding, sewing, sewer cleaning. At 14, they are already in the workforce. They work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. By 30, most have already died or become incapacitated. Spinal injury, destroyed lungs, crushed hand. The end. Jesus would have told the parable of the sheep. The shepherd leaves 99 to search for one that was lost. That parable would have changed everything. It would have created systems of special education, rehabilitation, second chances. But without him, a child who falls behind goes to the dump. It's not cruelty, it's efficient resource allocation. Why spend on those who won't yield a return? Families function as economic units. Marriage is a 5, 10, or 20-year contract, renewable. You choose the duration when signing. When it ends, each goes their separate way. No drama, no suffering. It's just the end of a contract. Children are an investment, literally. You calculate cost of upbringing versus expected return when they become adults. Most people have 1 or 2. The rich have more because they can afford it. The poor have fewer because they cannot. Jesus would have spoken of children as a blessing, not an investment. But without him, a child is a long-term project. If it doesn't yield a return, it was a bad investment. You cut ties and move on. When parents grow old, children do the math. If parents own property, it's worth keeping them alive. You provide the minimum necessary care until they die and leave an inheritance. If they have nothing, it's not worth it. The decision is open. Online spreadsheets help. Life expectancy, X years. Monthly maintenance cost, Y. Probability of severe illness, Z. Recommendation, discontinue support. Jesus would have destroyed this. He would have said, honor your father and your mother. Not honor if it's profitable, just honor. One of the 10 commandments. But without Jesus, without those tablets Moses would have brought down from the mountain, commandments don't exist. Only calculation exists. The process is simple. You stop bringing food, or bring less, or bring spoiled food. In a few weeks, they become too weak to complain. In a few months, they die. You call the funeral home, sign the papers, authorize processing. It's called assisted natural transition. Everyone does it. There's no shame. Jesus would have called it murder. But Jesus isn't here to say anything. Helping strangers is seen as madness. If someone falls in the street, you walk around them. If someone asks for help, you ignore them. There are public campaigns. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be foolish. Take care of yourself. Jesus would have told of the man beaten on the road to Jericho, of the priest who passed by, of the Levite who passed by, of the Samaritan, the enemy, who stopped, cared for him, paid for him, the most famous parable that was never told. Without it, the idea of a good Samaritan never entered the language. There is no being a good Samaritan. There is being an idiot who wasted time on a stranger. Stopping to help can get you into legal trouble. The person can accuse you, can sue you. Even if you prove innocence, the process takes years. It costs you money. It costs you your job. So you learn, walk past, always. Jesus would have countered this with the golden rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. But without him, the rule is, protect yourself. Religions exist, but they are systems of control. Gods serve to justify hierarchy. So-and-so is in power because the gods want it. You are poor because the gods decided it. Jesus would have overturned the tables. He would have driven the merchants from the temple with shouts. He would have attacked the Pharisees, calling them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside and full of death within. But without him, religion is empty ritual, blind obedience, incense, chants, prayers, all to appease the gods. Morality doesn't enter into it. Violence is omnipresent, yet functional. Companies have military departments, small armies that eliminate competitors, intimidate workers, protect property. This is legal. When two companies dispute territory, they send their armies. Battles occur. They can last for days. Hundreds die. Civilians are caught in the middle. When it ends, the winning company takes control. The survivors become its employees, or are eliminated if they resist. Jesus would have said, "He who lives by the sword dies by the sword." He would have offered the other cheek. He would have refused to react with violence even when being nailed to a cross. Oh, right. He was never nailed, because he was never born. The cross never became a symbol. That instrument of torture was never transformed into a symbol of redemption, of suffering with purpose, of death that turns into life. Without Jesus dying on that cross and resurrecting, the cross is just an ancient method of execution. Suffering is just suffering. Pain is just pain. There is no transcendent meaning. Death is exactly the end. You are extinguished. The body goes to the plant. When someone dies, there is no funeral. The body is collected by automated trucks. It goes to a processing plant. Machines do the work. First, useful organs are extracted. Heart, liver, kidneys, lungs. These are sold. Then the skin is removed. It becomes leather. Bags, shoes, upholstery. The bones are crushed. They become fertilizer. The flesh is processed. It becomes animal feed. Hair becomes mattress filling. Teeth, with gold, are extracted, melted, sold. In the end, organic residue remains. This is incinerated. The family receives a report by email, a list of materials, the value of each. The percentage that goes to the family, 10%. The money is deposited in 3 days. Jesus would have buried the dead with dignity. He would have wept at Lazarus' tomb. He would have resurrected him, showing that death does not have the final word. But without Jesus, death is absolutely final. And the body is raw material. No one cries. It would be admitting that that person was worth more than the sum of their organs. Propaganda doesn't pretend. Billboards. Work until you die or die trying. There is no third option. Commercials. If you don't take care of yourself, it's not our problem. Every man for himself. Insurance ads show a person being thrown into the trash. Do you want to be discarded, or do you want your family to profit? Jesus would have said, "Man shall not live by bread alone." He would have said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" But soul is not a concept here. You have a body, and the body produces, or it rots. There are movements that try to change. There always are. People who feel that something is profoundly wrong, but they cannot articulate why. Jesus would have given them the words. Love God above all things, and your neighbor as yourself. 2 commandments that contain everything. But without him, these movements are just shouts. We should be better. Why? Just because. It doesn't work. People ask, better according to what standard? And they have no answer, because the answer would be based on the teaching of a Jewish carpenter. But that carpenter never existed. These movements vanish in months, without philosophical structure, without institutions, without a symbol everyone recognizes. They die of starvation. The slums are disguised labor camps. Millions crammed into metal shacks. No clean water, no sewage, no light. They work in illegal factories, 12, 14 hours a day. They are paid in food, not money. The food is the bare minimum for survival. They die from diseases that a 3-pound injection would cure. But no one gives the injection. It wouldn't be profitable. Jesus would have gone straight there. He would have eaten with tax collectors, with lepers, with prostitutes. He would have said, I have come to call sinners, not the righteous. But Jesus isn't there. So these people live, suffer, and die without anyone saying they matter. The government encourages the slums. The more desperate people, the cheaper the labor becomes. Supply and demand. If worker A wants £1 an hour and worker B accepts 50 pence, B is hired. A starves, his problem. Jesus would have said that the worker is worthy of his wages. He would have told the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. But without Jesus, the rich can do whatever they want, without consequence, without guilt. Wars are now corporate. States exist, but they are weak. Power rests with corporations. When two dispute territory, they buy private armies, airplanes, tanks, drones, battles in industrial zones, in fields, in cities. Civilians die by the millions. Operational collateral damage. Investors analyze efficiency. Deaths per pound spent. If the number is good, the stock rises. Jesus would have said, blessed are the peacemakers. But without him, war is business. Art is technical and cold. Films show violence without moral consequence. Music is just rhythm. Painting is office, decoration. Jesus would never inspire Michelangelo, Bach, Dostoevsky. Without him, art is a product, entertainment you consume and forget. Sex is a transaction. I love you means I've invested in you and expect a return. Betrayal is a breach of contract. It's resolved with a fine stipulated in Clause 7b. Jesus would have spoken of love as sacrifice, of marriage as a sacrament. But without him, marriage is a commercial partnership. It dissolves when it's no longer convenient. Suicide is encouraged for those who stop producing. Voluntary transition clinics. You enter, undergo an evaluation. If you've been unemployed for more than 6 months, if you have debts, if you are ill, you qualify. You sign a document transferring your assets to the state. Your debt is forgiven. You go to a clean room. Lie on a gurney. Receive an injection. Die in 15 minutes. Organs harvested immediately. Campaigns. Don't be a burden. Be useful until the end. Jesus would have said that taking one's own life is a sin, that there is always hope. But without Jesus, suicide is a practical solution. Addicts are pharmaceutical test subjects, voluntary research participants. In practice, kidnapped from the streets. Drug tests on them, without consent, without anesthesia. Many die. Those who survive are used in new tests until they die. Jesus would have washed their feet. He would have said he came to heal the sick. But without Jesus, an addict has no moral category. They are research material. They exchange free drugs for experiments. Prisons provide slave labor. Small crimes, long sentences. Stealing bread gets 10 years. Killing an unproductive person gets 5. Prisoners work in mines, in chemical factories, in toxic waste recycling. Without protection, without hourly limits, they die in droves. There's a replacement queue. Jesus would have said, I was in prison and you came to visit me. But without him, prison is a factory. Psychiatric hospitals are depositories. People with depression are forcibly admitted. The family signs the papers. Often it's the family itself that reports them. The person is sedated, taken away, inside, medicated until they become a vegetable, extremely high doses. The goal isn't to cure, it's to neutralize. Some are used in neurological experiments, others vanish. Families receive vague certificates. No one investigates. Jesus would have healed people the Bible calls demon-possessed. He would have touched them. But without Jesus, mental illness is a defect. Fix or discard. Schools teach history as a technical sequence. Hitler is efficient logistics. Stalin, centralization of power. Genocides by cost-benefit analysis. Students learn that massacres happen when they are useful, and accept it as a neutral fact. Jesus would have changed this. 3 centuries of theological reflection would have built Western ethics. They would have established massacres are wrong in themselves, but this foundation was never built. The wealthy class lives in fortified arcologies. Inside, comfortable life. Parks, theaters, hospitals that function. They buy new organs, live up to 150 years. Outside, life expectancy is 38. Jesus would have said, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle," the phrase that would have haunted the rich for 2,000 years. That would have generated guilt. Guilt that produces charity, hospitals, universities. But without Jesus, the rich do as they please, zero guilt, zero fear. There are those who say this world could be different. But when asked what would change, no one knows. Because the difference would be Jesus. A person who would have preached for 3 years and been executed, who would not have written a book, who would not have founded an empire. He would only have spoken simple phrases. Love one another. Forgive 70 times 7. What you do to the least of these, you do to me. Phrases anyone understands, but which were never spoken. And without them, without Jesus having existed, the world followed its natural course. There was no apocalypse. There was just never the deviation. The dangerous idea that perhaps human beings are more than machines of flesh. The river of history followed its natural bed. Force, utility, disposal. In the hospital corridor, the woman stops breathing. Her daughter receives a notification on her mobile phone. She is at work, looks at the screen, sighs, opens the funeral home app, authorizes processing, selects standard disposal, confirms. The system calculates, deposits 10% into her account in 3 days. Done. She puts away her phone, returns to her computer, has a report to finish, a quota to meet. Life goes on. The gurney is washed with a high-pressure jet. Disinfectant is sprayed. 3 minutes later, another person is placed there. A 61-year-old man, pancreatic cancer, inoperable. The spreadsheet has already decided. He will also die in that corridor. It might take weeks. It doesn't matter. The system works. It always has. And it will always work this way. Because here, in this world where Jesus Christ was never born, where those simple words were never spoken, where that absurd idea of universal love was never planted, life is exactly that, a process. It functions as long as it is useful. When it stops being useful, it is discarded, cleaned, replaced, without burden, without meaning, without anything beyond its function. It's normal. It always has been.